Headlines: hunger strikes of the father of a ferry disaster victim and an opposition lawmaker end for now. But political deadlock here in Korea over the ferry disaster bill continues. Korea extends its current account surplus streak to a 29th straight month in July. We break down the numbers for you. And South Korea expresses deep concerns as the Japanese Prime Minister reportedly sent a message to a ceremony honoring its war criminals earlier this year. Hello and welcome to the show, live from Seoul. I am Kang Chery. The father of a ferry disaster victim who's been on a hunger strike demanding more say in a bill that would investigate the April ferry disaster ended his fast today, and so did a key opposition lawmaker. But this does not mean progress in terms of unlocking Korea's parliamentary deadlock. Myung-kil tells us more.
A prominent relative of the victims of the ferry disaster ended his 46-day hunger strike, raising hopes of a breakthrough in a political deadlock that has paralyzed parliamentary proceedings in Korea for months. The fasting by Kim Myung-ho, the father of one of 233 students killed in the April ferry sinking, has been the focal point of protests by victims' families demanding an independent investigation into the circumstances behind the disaster.
Although I decided to end the hunger strike, I will continue to protest until the special law is passed at the National Assembly. My goal is to build a country that is safe to live in. When I get better, I will go back to the Gwanghwamun Square.
The families want a committee in charge of the probe to be given investigative powers, but rival parties have been unable to come to terms on an agreement that satisfies all sides. The bereaved families say the end of Kim's hunger strike is not indicative of any progress being made in negotiations, and that their protests will continue. But the end of Kim's fasting is raising hopes that differences will be bridged. The ruling Saenuri Party is most optimistic. Ruling party leaders held a second round of talks with representatives of the victims' families on Wednesday and reported progress. Another meeting is scheduled for next Monday. The talks are taking place with a newfound sense of urgency. The main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy has boycotted all parliamentary activities in protest at the ruling party's refusal to give bereaved family members a greater say in negotiations over a bill that would probe the causes of the ferry accident. The ruling and opposition parties have reached agreement on the legislation on two previous occasions, but both drafts were rejected by the Sewol-ho ferry families. Myung-kil, Arirang News.
Remember North Korea's angry reactions over the South Korean and U.S. joint military drills? Well, the regime can now loosen up a little bit, because South Korea and the U.S. wrapped up their training today, 1 day ahead of schedule. The Combined Forces Command says the computer-simulated Ulti Freedom Guardian exercises successfully ended as all the training goals were met. It added the two allies were able to elevate their joint defense capabilities as well as their readiness alongside the UN sending states this year. Analysts anticipate the completion of the exercises, which North Korea considers a war game, could pave the way for the two Koreas to seek improving ties. The Japanese government has confirmed that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe recently sent a note hailing some of Japan's worst war criminals as martyrs and the foundation of the country. The news may further strain ties with its neighbors, including Korea. Kwon-soo tells us more.
It comes as no great surprise anymore when Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe chooses to glorify some of Japan's worst war criminals, much to the despair and anger of Japan's neighbors who suffered under Japanese imperialism. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga has confirmed that Abe sent a note to a memorial ceremony in late April. In his message, Abe offers his sincere condolences to the criminals whom he refers to as martyrs that became the foundation of the country's peace and prosperity. It was the first time a sitting prime minister sent such a note, but Suga said Abe's remarks did not come from his capacity as prime minister.
In this case, he sent this message as Shinzo Abe and the head of the Liberal Democratic Party. As such, the government thinks of him in this respect as a private citizen.
Korea's foreign ministry told Arirang News that it's deeply concerned by Prime Minister Abe's act, calling it another denial of the post-war structure set by the international community to address Japan's past atrocities. On the same day, China demanded that the Japanese government make a clean break with militarism for the sake of rebuilding relations with its neighbors. The ceremony's venue was founded in 1994 to worship nearly 1,200 soldiers convicted of some of the worst wartime crimes. 14 Class A war criminals are among those who are also honored at the more well-known Yasukuni War Shrine in Tokyo. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye has promised residents of Korea's southeast hit by recent torrential rain that she would look into declaring the region a special disaster zone. She went to Pusan today, one of the hardest hit areas, and ordered officials to come up with a new system to better respond to such natural disasters, as well as an inspection of aging reservoirs nationwide. She also called to make sure affected residents return to their ordinary lives as soon as possible so that they can enjoy the Korean Thanksgiving holiday next month with their families.
For the latest in news that impacts Korea and the world, join Kang Chery for a lively half hour that covers politics, business, international news, and much more. Live at 8 every weeknight on Arirang TV.
Human Rights Council headquarters in Geneva on Thursday, finding ways to persuade.
Korea logged a current account surplus for the 29th straight month in July. This time, imports grew faster than exports. So, does this mean a rebound in domestic consumption? Our Hwang Ji reports.
Korea has posted a current account surplus every month for nearly 2.5 years now. The central bank says the nation logged a surplus of $7.91 billion last month. That's almost identical to the $7.92 billion surplus recorded in June and to the $7.9 billion surplus in the same month last year. Exports of products rose 1% from a year earlier to almost $54 billion on strong shipments of automobiles and steel products, while imports increased 3.5% to $47 billion. The Bank of Korea says, however, that the rise in imports does not necessarily indicate a pickup in domestic demand as it comes on the back of strong oil prices. Experts also warn on too much optimism.
The import volume still remains sluggish, but the rise in energy prices pulled up the total amount of imports. So the current account surplus is still largely coming from the slumping domestic demand.
The current account surplus during the January to July period now stands at over $47 billion, up 20% from the same period a year ago. The bank expects the Korean economy to easily reach its $84 billion current account surplus projection for all of this year, but adds that this month's surplus is likely to fall short of July's due to fewer working days. Hwang Ji, Arirang News.
Kia Motors is looking to expand its presence in the North American market by building a huge plant in South America. The company says it will be a great access point that will help Kia take better advantage of a growing industrial base. Kim Jin has the details.
Korea's second largest automaker, Kia Motors Corporation, plans to build its first factory in Pesqueria, Mexico, just 200 kilometers south of the U.S. state of Texas. The company will invest more than $1 billion in the plant, which covers 500,000 square meters of land. The assembly plant is expected to start producing 300,000 Forte compact cars and Rio subcompacts in a year.
So this additional 300,000 will help us to be one of the leading automotive manufacturers in the global market.
Mexico has been a great attraction for the automotive industry. Local demand for cars is around 1 million units a year, and labor is cheap and highly productive. The country also boasts great access to markets in the U.S. and Canada, as Mexico is a member of the North American Free Trade Agreement. Due to this, auto giants, including General Motors, Volkswagen, Toyota, and Nissan, have already built assembly lines in the country. Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto says Kia's expansion in the region will help boost investment in the country.
Kia's commitment is to induce more investment from auto part companies of $1.5 billion.
Korean automakers have to pay duties of up to 20% when directly exporting to Mexico due to lack of a free trade agreement between the two countries. But now with a plant in Mexico, Kia expects to raise the proportion of its global production from 44% to rival that of other automotive giants, which hover around 75%. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Korea's state-run anti-corruption agency has started cracking down on the illegal trade of agricultural, livestock, and fisheries products ahead of the Chuseok, or Korean Thanksgiving holiday, next month. The Anticorruption and Civil Rights Commission says it will be closely looking into irregular cases such as false labeling of origin or fake expiration dates until September 12th. Anyone who suspects a business of corrupt practices can inform the commission through its website or dialing 110 in Korea. Those providing information are eligible for up to $1 million in rewards, and their identities will be protected. Korea has apparently been spending way too much money to make up for the lack of economic participation by women. A new report says government funds for working moms are being wasted and that more needs to be done to get those women back to work after having kids. Shin Se-min tells us more.
Roughly $192 billion. That's the social cost over the past 13 years due to the lagging economic participation rate of women in Korea, according to a new report by the Korean Women's Development Institute. It points out three main sources for the total. They include reduced salaries for women who re-enter the workplace, the expenses to retain these female employees once they return to the workforce, and an increase in government budget to support the economic participation of women. The $192 billion total suggests a number of things, one being that government efforts to address the gender gap in the Korean workplace have not been effective. Many Korean women leave their careers to raise children and have difficulties returning to the workforce later on. When they do, they're often forced to settle for lower-paying part-time jobs. Over $600 million in this year's national budget are allocated towards supporting the economic participation of women and helping them keep their jobs. But the report suggests that the money is not being used effectively, and it calls for changes, pointing out that Korea's aging population and low birth rate are major obstacles for future growth, and that getting women more actively engaged would help minimize the negative effects. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
And now on to a slightly nostalgic item, I would say. If you grew up in Korea in the 80s or 90s or even younger, you're bound to have grown up with a banana-flavored milk made by this company called Pinggure. The beverage is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and our Connie Lee tells us the secret behind its long-running popularity.
It was in 1974. When banana-flavored milk first appeared in stores around Korea in its unique jug-shaped bottle. It came out at a time when the Korean government was urging its citizens to drink more milk. To encourage people, food and beverage manufacturer Pinggure had the bright idea to flavor the milk with banana, a fruit once considered a luxury.
Bananas were expensive during that time and not easily available. People appreciated just getting a taste of this fruit through this drink.
The drink was a big hit then, and it's still a big hit now, enjoyed by people of all ages.
I like it because it's sweet. My friends like it too, and drinking it makes us happy.
Over 800,000 bottles are produced each day as the company's factories strive to meet the demand. In Korea alone, about 250 million bottles of banana milk are sold each year. That means in Korea, an average person drinks about 5 a year. Sales also back up the drink's increasing popularity. From 92 billion won, or about $90 million in 2005, sales surpassed $148 million in 2013.
Overall, we believe the drink's unchanging nature makes it a success. The taste and look of the drink hasn't changed much over the past 40 years. And in the next 40 years, we want to be a recognized global brand like Coca-Cola.
The drink is already being recognized in China. Exports were a mere 500 million won in 2009, but they reached 15 billion won, or about $14.8 million last year. Officials credit the popularity of the Korean wave and the increased number of Chinese tourists to Korea for the explosive growth of banana-flavored milk. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Korea's leading orchestra, the Seoul Philharmonic, has wrapped up their European tour with a performance at a 120-year-old festival that features some 80 concerts every summer. Our cultural correspondent Park Ji-won, who is traveling with the orchestra, filed this report from London.
The BBC Proms is one of the world's greatest classical music festivals, founded back in 1895. Since then, the annual event has showcased the most prestigious orchestras and musicians. This is where the Proms concerts are held every evening from the month of July through September, all broadcast live on BBC Radio 3. And the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra makes its debut here at the Proms this summer as the first Korean orchestra to take part in its 120-year history. Maestro Jung Myung-hoon, who's led the orchestra since 2005, nurturing it to become one of Asia's best while at the helm, says he's excited to meet the audience members at the Proms.
It is a great honor to be asked to participate in this festival, and it is a recognition of the quality of the orchestra. But I think as performers, once we start a concert, all those things don't matter. It's just that public.
The Seoul Philharmonic performs 3 repertoires: Debussy's La Mer, Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 6, and a contemporary piece written by prominent Korean composer Eun Suk-jin titled Su Concerto for Shan and Orchestra.
This piece is very abstract, but they have so amazing, so thousand colors between the chord harmony, between breathing. Each breathing is so organic.
With its London performance, the Seoul Philharmonic Orchestra wraps up its 2014 European tour, spanning 4 music festivals, including the Grafenegg in Austria and the Merano in Italy. Park Ji-won, Arirang News, London.
Ukraine has accused Russia of launching a fresh military attack across its border as heavy fighting erupts on multiple fronts in the eastern part of the country. And for more, Paul E. is joining us from the news center as always. Paul, it's been one day since the leaders of both countries held face-to-face talks, but it looks like the crisis in eastern Ukraine has escalated to new levels.
Right. That meeting between Presidents Poroshenko and Putin in Belarus had raised high hopes of a long-term ceasefire. However, as you said, the situation seems farther than ever from that goal. And in the latest development, a separatist leader has reportedly said that thousands of Russian citizens have joined the fight against Ukrainian government forces. This as the U.S. State Department says a Russia-led counteroffensive is already underway. Our Yu Lian reports.
The House of Culture in the eastern Ukraine rebel stronghold of Donetsk consumed in fire. While some fled, some stayed to examine the damage. Locals there say the fire killed 1 and left a few others wounded. This comes as Ukraine accused Russia of new military incursions on Wednesday, the latest development in 5 months of fighting between Ukrainian government forces and pro-separatist rebels. Russia has constantly denied accusations it is supplying weapons and sending soldiers to help the rebel forces. No reaction yet from Moscow on the alleged incursion. This latest escalation comes only a day after hours of talks between the two countries' presidents seem to mark a turning point in a 5-month-old crisis. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko and Russian President Vladimir Putin, along with EU representatives, met on Tuesday in Minsk.
Yesterday's talks in Minsk were very effective. I clearly stressed that there will be no bargaining over sovereignty, territorial integrity, the independence of our country, the sovereign choice of the Ukrainian people.
Following the talks, Putin also said Moscow will contribute to create a situation of trust, but hopes the war that killed over 2,200 had hit a turning point are quickly fading from Wednesday's attack. Also, less than 24 hours since the Minsk meeting, Ukraine warned Europe that Russia plans to halt gas transit to Europe by the end of the year. Russia denied the claim, saying it is making maximum efforts to fulfill its contracts with Europe. Yurian, Arirang News.
And moving on to the Middle East, Paul, the UN has condemned Islamic State militants and the Syrian government for committing war crimes in their fight against each other. These allegations have been backed by hard evidence and witness testimonies. Give us the details.
Well, the new UN report outlines human rights abuses committed in the war-torn state of Syria, as observed during a special inquiry between January and July this year. It said public executions were not rare in northern territories held by the Islamic State militants, who would display bodies in public spaces for several days as part of their campaign of fear. It added children were also being forcibly recruited to join and fight in their so-called jihad.
Members of ISIS have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Aleppo and al-Raqqa governorates, including acts of torture, murder, enforced disappearance, and forcible displacement.
The government of Bashar al-Assad was accused of war crimes, including using chemical agents in 8 separate incidents in April and May this year. The UN said there was clear proof in some cases that civilian gatherings were deliberately targeted. It also said that prison detainees were subjected to horrific torture and sexual assaults.
I see. And shifting to the latest corruption scandal to hit Europe, IMF chief Christine Lagarde is being investigated for her role in a controversial payout during her term as French finance minister. What are authorities there saying about this case?
Well, following the announcement of the formal probe, Lagarde was said to be suspected of simple negligence in a case that led the French government to cash out 400 million euros to business tycoon Bernard Tapie. The French magistrate is considering possible corruption charges over whether the arbitration process was rigged in favor of the businessman. Lagarde has called the suspicion baseless. She emerged from the Court of Justice in Paris on Wednesday after undergoing 15 hours of questioning.
Concerning what you call the Tapie affair, there's an investigation underway. We're in a democracy. I obviously want all these questions to be clarified. I have every confidence in this procedure, not least because my conscience is perfectly clear.
Political analysts say the investigation could jeopardize Lagarde's chances of being considered as a possible candidate for France's 2017 presidential election.
And finally, the instant messaging service Snapchat has reportedly been valued to be worth around $10 billion. Not bad for a startup by 2 university students from Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's impressive to say the least, especially after the company reportedly turned down a $3 billion offer from its rival Facebook last year. And according to the Wall Street Journal, Snapchat recently signed a deal with venture capital firm Kleiner Perkins, which agreed to invest up to $20 million into the 3-year-old startup. The instant messaging app is estimated to have grown to more than 100 million users worldwide, and it's those numbers that are attracting major players in the industry.
Of messages charging a fee. You're looking at the Microsofts, much rumored to be looking at Snapchat, by the way. You're looking at Alibaba's, you're looking at people like Google, you're looking at folks like Apple. But really, you have to have a huge treasury, you have to have tons of cash, you have to have very valuable shares, and you have to be a little bit desperate to make sure that you get those users and someone else doesn't.
Snapchat has now entered a select 10 billion valuation club, joining other top tech firms such as the ride-sharing service Uber and room rental service Airbnb. Chery?
All right, Paul, thank you very much for those stories, and we'll see you back here in just about 2 hours. Happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome. I'm Kim Bo-kyung with your weather updates. Now, it has been a clear day here in Seoul, but rain continued for the 5th straight day down in the southern part of the country. Now, this is because regions down south are at the edge of a low pressure trough from China. Be aware as more showers are forecast tomorrow, with Jeju expecting up to 60 millimeters and Seoul, Gyeonggi-do province about 30, and most areas down south will get no more than 20. An umbrella is a must for tomorrow, but on the bright side, we'll finally get a break from all the rain, with the weekend shaping up to be nice and sunny, perfect for outdoor activities. On to Friday's readings. Seoul will mix it to 29, while cities down south hover around 26. On to other places. Jeju peaks at 24, Dokdo and Myeong-kil hit the mid-20s. That does it for me for now, but I'll be back with more updates after 10. And that will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.